Good afternoon. My name is Barry Anderson. I'm an Associate Justice on the Minnesota Supreme Court. I had the opportunity to judge judge over the last several years, but I also had the opportunity to serve as an assistant coach many years ago, and that was, got a chance to see it from both sides. So,
My name is Stephanie Hession. I teach in Fairfax County Public Schools, which is around this area. So just a 45-minute drive for me. I teach advanced academic civics. I've been judging regional and state level Virginia for 10 years, but this is my first time doing nationals, and I'm really enjoying it.
I'm Troy Smith. I'm a professor of political science at Brigham Young University in Hawaii. I'm also a fellow at the Center for the Study of Federalism. Thank you for your work, and we look forward to hearing it.
be so kind as to introduce yourselves, your faculty members, and advisors.
Hello, my name is Haley Sato, and I live by these words of Democritus, that we should be good, not out of fear, but because it is what is right.
Meton dins duci, non eventos externos. Hi, I'm Lachlan Bailey, and I follow the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, that all that we can control is what's in our minds, not outside events, and from that we can find strength.
Liberté et l'effet de droit, tout ce qu'en remontant les lois. Hi, my name is Emily Brestel, and I live by these words of Montesquieu, that liberty is the right to do what the law permits.
Esse est precepti. Hi, my name is Jay Simon, and I live by the words of George Berkeley, as all that we can truly know is that which we perceive. And on behalf of Unit 1, our advisor Gretchen Wolfang, and Tahoma High School representing the state of Washington, thank you for judging.
All right, Unit 1. What are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? And the question we've been asked to have a conversation with you about is number 3. In the Republic, Socrates says that one of the primary characteristics of democracies is that the citizens are free, and there is license in it to do whatever one wants. What does Socrates mean by this? What concerns did Socrates have, if any, regarding the stability or fragility of democracy? And how has the Constitution addressed the issue of license? The floor is yours.
Democracy was the right of the people to choose their own tyrant. James Madison.
The people are not always best suited to make decisions for themselves, making absolute freedom a volatile variable in any society.
In the 8th book of the Republic, Socrates defined democracy as the freest of any regime among 4 unjust forms of government.
When talking to Glaucon, he asks, would you agree first then that the people will be free, and able to do whatever they choose? He goes on further to say that where freedom is, the people are able to order themselves in their own life as they so choose.
Socrates is declaring that in a democracy, people are at their most free to act as they please, claiming that this then seems likely to be the fairest of states. A characterization later reflected by Patrick Henry, who said a democracy is a system of self-determination. It is the right to pick the wrong choice.
This entire section of dialogue is there for one reason, to set up Socrates' critique of democracy. His mentions of freedom slowly begin to allude to the dangers which arise, which is that while democracy is a regime of freedom and choice, it's not necessarily one of liberty and justice.
The dichotomy of absolute freedom is that it is simultaneously the greatest preservation of the individual, but the greatest threat to society. Socrates thought government to be cyclical, and that the absolute freedom of democracy is what plunged it into tyranny.
His greatest criticisms of democracy, however, were not out of any malice towards any institutional power, but instead with his peers. He believed that there was a fallacy of free will manipulated by the influential and dictated by desire.
He believed that those with less would act out of greed, focusing only on their own self-preservation rather than the common good, arguing the most aggravated form of tyranny and slavery is out of extreme liberty. Its freedom is anarchy.
Echoed by peers like Thucydides, Socrates believed that the people lacked the education to make proper decisions regarding states' policies, even worsened by an absence of civic virtue.
He goes on to argue that trampling these fine principles laid solemnly down at the foundation of their city would only serve to cause the people themselves suffering.
This fragility was recognized by the framers, as Madison wrote in Federalist 10 that a pure democracy could admit no cures for the mischiefs of faction. This largely echoes Socrates' big concern with democracy, which is that the mob mentality and the majority would make decisions that benefited themselves rather than the society as a whole.
To address this issue of license, the framers set out to create a government insulated from government for the people.
Taking inspiration from philosophers like Plato and Montesquieu, the U.S. Constitution is inherently anti-democratic, as to preserve the common good, while still delegating democratic freedoms as the institutions get closer to the people, as to preserve individual will.
As Jim Madison wrote, the purpose of a representative democracy is to refine and enlarge the public's views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true course of the nation.
Filtering the raw freedoms and influence of the majority stands to create laws which benefit the society best as a whole, maintaining general will but checking license through educated representatives.
This is reflected in Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, which establishes the formal body of the Electoral College, which directly elects the Vice President and President of the United States. This separation from direct democracy and the federal state is also seen in the Senate and Supreme Court. Democracy, however, in a refined form, is held up absolutely by the states and the delegation of the 10th Amendment and their powers. Because they are able, they have the unique ability to react to the local needs of their community, this is not possible at a national scale.
As seen in Article 2, Section 1 of our Washington State Constitution, which outlines the right to initiative and referendum, mirrored by 26 other states with similar protections.
The greatest lesson from the concerns of classical philosophers is that extremism towards any absolute always equates to fragility in society. Thank you.
So if Socrates is right, that excessive democracy is a threat to freedom, and a threat generally, is it a mistake for Washington to have initiative and referendum? Should states be moving away from direct democracy?
So there are 26 states that have initiative day referendum, and in our Washington State Constitution, it's found in Article 2, Section 1. And I don't believe that it is a mistake because it reacts to the local needs of the community, but because of the issues of direct democracy, largely mob mentality, it is not possible at a national scale.
As Plato said, if you do not take interest in the affairs of your government, then you are doomed to live under the rule of fools. It is important for people to still have a say in their government, even if it is not this direct democracy. By having a say on their local scale, people can influence the legislation that takes place around them without being influenced by this mob mentality, the danger of a direct democracy.
Furthermore, Socrates believed where democracy came from was the demos, the lower social class of the people in ancient Greece. But we can clearly see here that the same civilians who would be, the same citizens that would be going through the initiative and referendum process are not the uneducated ones that are not taking interest in the affairs of their governments, like my colleague said. These are the ones that are proactively seeking out the better nation of our future by actively participating in their civic duties.
I would also say, going back to that extremism, it's only when we reach that extreme form of democracy that it becomes a true issue, which Washington does not have. This is only one process of getting laws. However, we still have representatives, we still have House members and Senate members.
So Socrates says, in a democracy, the idea of freedom becomes more important than the foundation of freedom. What does Socrates think the foundation of freedom is or should be?
Socrates believes that the foundation of freedom is much akin to what John Locke, a natural rights philosopher, would be, which in that freedom is unruly, unkept, and is kind of at a state of nature, where John Locke says that every man is free to order his actions and his duties as he wishes. There is no regard for how it affects other people and no regard for how they affect him.
I would also say that in the 8th book of the Republic, Socrates makes it very clear when he starts talking about the democratic man and says that the fall of the democracy comes when the democratic man no longer takes interest into his affairs, and that stems from the absolute freedom that he has under democracy. So when we talk about the foundation versus the actual preservation of it, that's what he's referring to, that this democracy needs to be preserved by the people, but it can't because they have so much freedom.
So we talked about federalism and the values that it brings, the diversity that it creates within society. But Socrates would be against that. He's in favor of a unitary sort of a system, that it's actually in the diversity that pulls apart the country. How would you respond in defense of the founders to Socrates' claims of problems of diversity and the need for unity?
Well, I would actually argue that many of the founders echoed a lot of similar ideas as Socrates. For example, in Federalist 55, James Madison says that even if every person in the Athenian democracy was Socrates, it would still be anarchy. So I don't believe that all of the founders were directly contrary to Socrates' idea of a unitarian government. However, I do believe that in defense of democracy, there was an issue that they had seen extreme oppression coming from Britain, and thus wanted their representation to be more apparent.
Disagreeing with my colleague Misato, I would take a more Montesquieuian perspective on this, that in order to be truly great, one must stand with the people, not above them. It is important to have this diversity in the government to account for all of the needs of the people, although not still a direct democracy for the danger of their mob mentality. Montesquieu influenced our founders by making them see that this diversity is important to unify their country.
reflecting our prepared remarks. At the very end, we told you, judges, that extremism towards any absolute is what equates to fragility in society. The founders, recoiling from the Articles of Confederation, sought to fix this by mixing a multitude of philosophers, not just Socrates, in founding the new nation of America.
I would also point.
Go ahead.
I would also point them to a current example of this, which is within the CCP inside of China, where we see that this very small group of people have the total control over the government, and we can see that people are going through human rights abuses. There's upwards of 2 million Uyghur Muslims in internment camps. We can see that this is overall a much worse system than we have set up now.
So I'm going to make an argument. I want you to tell me whether I'm right or wrong. I'm going to argue that our administrative agencies, EPA, FCC, etc., are effectively the experts, the philosopher kings that Socrates has concerns about, and that is a greater threat to freedom, to good government than anything else. Am I right or wrong about that?
Well, I'm inclined to agree with you, but I'm inclined to slightly disagree on the fact that they are always purely experts and going completely on rationale, as we've seen a lot of corruptions, for example, in the FDA. Difficulties with the nutritional value charts that were extended in the 90s were heavily based on campaigning and dark money. However, as Federalist One states, some of the worst and even so powerful are the reasons which serve to give false bias to the judgment that we on many occasions see good and wise men on both sides of the issues. So I believe that the agencies are not necessarily just the philosopher kings.
Disagreeing with my colleague Ms. Sato and disagreeing with you, I believe
That's why I asked the question. Go ahead.
that those agencies may be dangerous, but they are not close to the most dangerous threat to society. In Plato's Republic, he addresses this allusion to his readers. He asks you to imagine an empty storefront with both a candy salesman and a doctor looking to buy it. To the uneducated public, the candy salesman would seem like the ideal person, as he would provide them temporary sweets to fuel their desires. On the other hand, the doctor, though, might seem like the more liable candidate to the educated, the people in these institutions that you talk about. The doctor would serve the people more effectively as a whole in society in the future, and not influenced by these uneducated morals of the common good.
To further my colleague Ms. Bressel's point, democracy is the ultimate factor of tyranny. As Aristotle said, tyranny is defined as the compound of oligarchy and democracy in their most extreme forms. And we see here that democracy at an extreme form is far much more of a detriment to society than the expanding power of the executive agencies as you listed.
So, are we a democracy?
The answer to that question is no. We are a representative democracy, also a republic. We all have our own representatives, found proportionally in the House of Representatives, as well as across all the states, 2 from each inside the Senate.
So was he right in warning us about all of these things? Is that why we keep reading? Keep reading this?
I believe the reason we often look back at Socrates was actually Glaucon's challenge on why it is important to live justly in a community. I believe we look more to Socrates for his commentary on civic virtue than on his actual forms of government, believing again that for the advocation of philosopher kings.
We see Socrates influenced our government when it's not a direct democracy, but we also see the caution of, because it's not a direct democracy, we need to still limit the government. Seen in Article 2, Section 4, the impeachment clause, and Article 2, Section 3, the take care clause, the government is still under the same laws as the people. They don't receive any different laws than the people do, which keeps them under check even though the people are not directly electing them.
I would also say that the only real thing that Socrates got wrong was what he actually said the most just form of government would be, which once again would be that form of government where only the philosophers and the intellectuals would be the ones to be able to make the decisions. However, his critiques of democracy, oligarchy, democracy, and then of course tyranny are all perfect examples and great things that we should continue to read.
Okay, you talked about civic virtue. What is civic virtue? Is that controlled by the government, or does that come from alternative forces?
Civic virtue comes from alternative forces. It comes from every person. Every person has a choice to dedicate their life toward participating civically. Personally, I lead Washington's Air Army National Guard Youth Program, where I'm responsible for teaching young military youth.
Finish your thought.
I teach up to 8,000 young military youth about how to be better citizens and participate in their society.
Wow.
Well, that was fun. It's the last unit of the day. Let's just keep going. I guess you better. No, we better not.
Great job.
People want to eat and all that. Anyway, great statement. We had a great exchange. Lots of complex issues. not enough time to adequately explore them, but it was a really, really interesting conversation. You know, this initiative and referendum thing, I've been beating on this all day, and you, she's laughing at me.
Yes,
And you came up with a really interesting angle on this that I hadn't heard, which is, look, these are states, these are people living in states, this isn't the federal government, it's individual state action, and you've got a question, you've got an issue there of, or a concept there of, you know, subsidiarity, the lowest possible level of government, so to speak. I'm not sure that's right, but you know what, it's a great answer. And then on this question of the administrative law thing, I mean, I really did set this up and wanted to get an argument, and I got one. And I think this is you know, this is a complex issue, and I think it's a very defensible position. You rarely hear people talking about the take care of clause. I think we're gonna be hearing more about that in the years ahead, and I really thought that was well-founded as well. So, we had a great conversation, and I really enjoyed it. I guess we'll go this way, yes.
Oh,
Go ahead.
thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was like entranced by all of you. You were brilliant. I love the intensity, the way you feel about everything and the way you presented it. Not just that, but you didn't miss a beat when we were asking you these annoying questions. And to finish our day of judging, our long day of judging with you guys was really, really a treat. So thank you very much.
Yeah, fantastic job. Really enjoyed your discussion. I guess for me, I'd love to go to dinner with you and
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
There'd be, people would talk.
Not right.
I mean, the one thing I would suggest to maybe think about, where I would disagree, is the idea that the Constitution isn't democratic. And I think the distinction there to make is, as a species, right, it's not a democracy, it's not that direct democracy of Socrates. But I think the Founding Fathers, right, we the people, sets it up that it is and popular sovereignty, that it is based in the people, and federalism extends that power to the people. It's just that they've refined it, right? They're putting some limits and controls on it. So rather, in that regard, I think it's kind of a genus, right? It's not the family, it's not the species, but it is a genus of democracy, or constitutional republics for sure, but it fits within the rubric of democracy. That's just one thing that I would think a little bit about, but your answer is right, the way you dealt with federalism and diversity, that was fantastic.
Yeah, and that's the administrative law thing that we kind of kicked around a little bit. I would watch that issue in the years ahead, because I do think that it has, this is gonna be a topic of conversation with, not only just among lawyers, but ordinary citizens and how it affects them in ordinary life. And there's a lot of power vested in those agencies, not necessarily without a lot of oversight. And I think it's gonna be a bit of a flashpoint, so it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. But boy, what a great time we spent with you, so thanks very much.